to you all out there in YouTube land. Welcome back to Classic Dirtbike TV, the home of old school motocross, or scrambling as it used to be called way back in the day. Now, currently here in the UK, the classic and vintage racing season is more or less done and dusted for another racing year, and basically we're just filling in time now until we can get started on a brand new season, which will probably be around April of 2026. Now, through the winter period, we're going to be diving in and out of my video archives to bring you more of those classic bikes that I know you love. And to be fair, most of that footage is going to be taken from the last 10 years of the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. And we've got quite a few nice bikes for you to take a look at over the last few years of that show. We're going to dive straight into one of those videos now, and these are a few British classics that are filmed during 2025 at Telford. So let's dive straight in and take a look at these lovely British made Greeves machines. So it's certainly been quite some time since we've featured some British made Greeves bikes here on my YouTube channel, and if you're looking for some nice Greeves racers, then this Telford Dirt Bike Show, held at the Telford International Centre each February, is a great place to find them. And these examples that we're going to take a look at here were found at that very show in 2025, and these bikes here are just a few of the quality British classics that I came across during my meanderings in that year. And of course, once again, it's all thanks to the Greeves Riders Association for most of the bikes that we are just about to see here, because usually they do tend to display some of the rarest and finest examples of the iconic Greeves brand. And in the last few years, I've certainly been suitably impressed with the quality of machines that they always display, and these ones that you're about to see are yet more of those fantastic bikes. So anyhow, we're going to start with these pair of beauties here, and just in case you're wondering why it's not very busy with Telford punters, it's because these particular shots here were taken on the Friday afternoon, which was usually set-up time, and for me personally, quite a good time to film all the bikes before the crowds gather round them on the Saturday and Sunday, because at this time there's always plenty room to work around the bikes, although of course the downside to that particular arrangement is that usually there's not many people going around if you need to ask some questions on a particular machine. Right, so we're going to start with this classic here, which is Ian Hodges' 1961 250 Greeves Hoxton, a super rare and quite immaculately restored version of one of these early 1960s scramblers. Now, the history of these Hoxton Greeves was to honour the great Brian Stonebridge, who finished in second position in the 1950 250 European Motocross Championship, who, as I remember, the 250 title in that year, I think, was won by the great Rolf Tiblin. But other than that, Brian Stonebridge was also Greaves' competition manager and development engineer, which was, of course, up until he was tragically killed in a car accident that unfortunately at that time was being driven by his then employer, Bert Greeves. But anyhow, in 1957, Brian was riding a 197cc Greeves at Hoxton Park, and he went on to beat some of the top riders of that time, who of course were riding much bigger two-stroke and four-stroke bikes, and it was because of Brian's success at Hoxton Park that Bert Greeves decided to introduce a Greeves racer in his honour, which they did title the Greeves Hoxton, and this 1961 version of that iconic bike is possibly one of the best examples that you'll ever see. Now here you can see that even in 1961 Greeves were using this I-beam alloy down tube as part of the bike's chassis construction, which for its time was certainly classed as outer limits high tech for the time. So while most people out there still think that the modern alloy motocross bike frame only really came about in the 1990s, you can see that Greeves were doing it here more than 30 years earlier. Now with that alloy front down tube and some small diameter steel tube structure for the remainder of the frame, this was certainly one super light little racer. And with regards to the engine on our Hoxton 250 Greeves, in 1961 they were still being supplied their engines by Villiers at this time, but of course in the following few years the Greeves company would then go on to manufacture and build their own two-stroke engine. But nevertheless, this British built Villiers motor for its day was moderately powerful and reasonably reliable, but when Greeves began building their own two-stroke engines, they were much better and more powerful than these early Villiers power plants. And in our case here, Ian's Villiers engine, as you can see, is fitted with the correct Amal monoblock carburetor, which supplied all the premix fuel and air to many brands of British-made bikes in the 1950s and 60s. And I think he's even got the period correct Garda air filter sticker here on the airbox that told you how to wash the filter with petrol periodically and renew its matrix annually, because naturally these were the days before modern foam or other synthetic filter systems. And here at the front end of our Hoxton, these leading link front ends on these early Greeves were certainly a common feature on many of their models of that period. And as you can see, it was a complex layout that had a very simple pair of dampers on each side. But even more surprising was that this system actually worked very well in practice. Of course, it's nothing compared to our modern day suspension systems that we have nowadays, but for its time it was considered quite unique. And staying here at the front end of our Hoxton, we have an old school drum and shoe type braking system with, of course, the Greeves paddle wheel hub, as I think they called it back in the day, because of those cooling fins that they had on the outside of the drum. Anyhow, as I remember, I think these early Hoxton 250s would have had an alloy fuel tank, while of course many of the later Greeves models would then revert to lightweight fiberglass ones. And as we move on to the controls department, we've got the correct handlebars and all of the other period correct grips and cables and levers that our Hoxton would have had way back in 1961. But there's certainly no question that Ian's made a fantastic job of this bike's restoration, and I don't suppose there'll be many of these Brian Stonebridge Hoxton 250 still going around these days, but surely this one here has to be one of the best in the country. And whether Ian actually won any awards on the day for his restoration skills, I don't know, but surely with the quality of the workmanship on this very rare bike, it has to be worth some kind of winner's prize. Of course, sitting right next to Ian's Hoxton 250 was his 1966 250 MX3 Greeves Challenger, another immaculately restored version of one of these iconic British classic machines, and very typical of the kind of bike that you would have been able to see racing on British TV in the 1960s when the BBC would broadcast live winter scramble events on their BBC Grandstand Sports programme, and usually the commentary on those events were supplied by the late, great Murray Walker. So immediately you can see that 5 years on from the Hoxton model, Greeves were still using the I-beam alloy front end for their chassis, and the small diameter steel tubing for the rest of the frame. And the bike's rear swing arm was again made from just simple box section steel. And now you can see that Greeves were manufacturing and building their own two-stroke engines, and this 250 here was a much improved power plant over that earlier Villiers that they were being supplied with for their earlier models. But this was now a simple piston port motor with a 5-speed gearbox, and as I remember, I think it was a Stefa magneto system that supplied the sparks. Now the carburettor again, it was the tried and tested Amal monoblock, and at the bike's front end we had the banana style leading link front forks, which was a similar setup to our Hoxton 250, although this time the front suspension didn't go up inside the fork tubes, they were simply bolted on to the outside of the legs. And as I said, this front end suspension layout might look a bit bizarre by modern day standards, but for the 1960s this was cutting edge, and some of Britain's top scrambling stars were very quick on this kind of setup. But as we continue our way down the front suspension, also here on the front of our Challenger 250, it's a much more conventional drum and shoe type stopping system, and certainly different from the paddle wheel hub that we saw on that earlier Hoxton bike. And with regards the fuel storage system, the side panels and the mudguards in 1966, these would have all been made from fiberglass, although my guess is here that these items on Ian's Challenger will probably be plastic reproduction parts, because those very brittle fiberglass items did suffer quite a lot of abuse on the track, and breakages and replacements were very common, so I'll be very surprised if these are still those self-same fiberglass items. But in terms of their design and shape, they are absolutely identical to the ones that would have been fitted to this Greeves in the 1960s. But moving on to the rear of our 250 MX3, we had a simple set of not so much suspension units as just basic dampers, because these suspension systems had very little movement, and I think it was only about 3 inches that was the maximum amount of travel, and that's why when you saw these bikes racing on the track in the 1960s, you always saw the back end of the bike bouncing all over the place. But then again, this is what those past scrambling stars had to work with way back in the day. Anyhow, there was one little ingenious feature about these Greeves rear swing arms, and that was that this left-hand side of the swing arm was used as an oil storage tank for a lubrication system for that rear drive chain. So basically you just filled this side of the swing arm with oil, and you could then adjust the feed that dropped onto the chain with this little adjuster here on the top. So basically this was like an earlier version of the kind of Scott oiler system that you would use on your old road bike. Although overall, certainly, these MX3 250 Challengers were decent bikes because they were light and, of course, now very quick, having that new Greeves engine rather than the older Villiers power plant. And if you were to search YouTube and check out some of those old black and white BBC Grandstand archive scrambles from the 1960s, then you'll get a much better idea of how popular and competitive these Challengers were for that period. But anyway, there's no doubt at all that Ian Hodges knows his way around these old British Greeves racers, because these two that he had on display at Telford in 2025 are a pair of the nicest examples that I've seen in quite some time. And this Challenger here from 1966 is a credit to Ian's workmanship and his classic bike building skills, because he's certainly doing the world a favour here by preserving the heritage and the history of the great British Greeves brand. Right, so this was another rare and quite special bike that was sitting on the Greeves Riders Association display, and according to my research and the bike's registration number, this one here is a 1972 380 Greeves Griiffon enduro bike, a very rare and exotic example from the Greeves manufacturer. But just in case you're not up to speed on your Greeves models, these Griiffons were the replacements for the older Challenger that we just had a look at. But having said that, this is, I must say, the very first enduro and road registered example of a 380 Griiffon that I've ever come across. And a few of the very first things that you notice about these Griiffons compared to our Hoxton and Challengers is that this model here uses a conventional Reynolds 531 steel tubing chassis and a new redesigned engine, and of course conventional style front forks as well on the front, which, as I recall, I think were made by Seriani in Italy, although I'm sure that these Griiffons were also available with the older leading link front suspension, if that's what you preferred. So let's first just take a look at the Griiffon's engine, and the first outstanding feature that you do notice is that it's got quite a large surface area for the barrel and the head, and they do say that this design was to improve the cooling of the engine, as many of these Griiffons were sold in the USA as desert racers, and having this big cooling fin area certainly did help the motor keep cooler in some of those hot and dusty climates. Nevertheless, the engine was a single-cylinder 380, but a 250 was also available in that year, and the 380 in particular had a twin exhaust port barrel with these two header pipes going up and over the top of the engine and then connecting into just a single exhaust pipe silencer that ran down the right hand side of the bike. So this design did help keep the two headers and the exhaust pipe itself out of harm's way from anything that would otherwise damage it. And I must say it does look like this particular bike here still has its original 1972 header pipes and tailpipe. Now the gearbox this time was a 4-speeder Albion unit that just simply bolted on to the back of the engine, so a full strip down of the motor wasn't required if you had any kind of transmission problems, which again were quite few and far between on this Albion gearbox. And also, as I just mentioned there, it was a pair of conventional Seriani forks on these later Griiffons that, for their time, were very good suspension units, and they were used on many different makes and models of motorcycles throughout the 1970s. And the front and the rear stoppers were again old school drum and shoe affairs, which once more were very common on a lot of different off-roaders of that period. And as we make our way along and onto the rear of our Griiffon, for 1972, it probably again would have been a very simple pair of girdling dampers on the back of our British-built Griiffon that only did really that, just dampen the up and down oscillations of the bike, because for that 1970s time period, you couldn't exactly call these parts suspension units, because they did have little to no means of any kind of adjustment. And as we move on to the fuel tank and the rest of the bike's bodywork, which this time, of course, were now being made of fiberglass to try and help keep the overall weight of the bike down to a decent level. And this fuel cell here would probably have held over the 2 gallons of premix gas, so that was usually more than enough to see you through the longest of scrambles or enduro events. But the other attractions of these Greeves Griiffons is that you could buy them in a variety of different colours, and personally I've seen these bikes in things like British Racing Green and blue. I think I've even seen one in gold metal flake, or in our case here, a kind of metal flake red. So although I'm not sure exactly how many colours were available, there was certainly plenty of variety, that's for sure. Now, the model that followed this 1972 Griiffon was called the QUB Griiffon, in reference to the Queen's University Belfast, where Dr. Gordon Blair, who at that time was a 2-stroke expert, was commissioned by Bert Greeves to try and extract more power from the 380 motor, which I'm sure he did succeed in doing, and I think he managed to get another few horses from this engine and take it from what was initially, I think, about 33 horsepower to 44, and to reward Dr. Blair's work, Greeves then renamed the 1973 model the Griiffon QUB in Dr. Blair's honour. So there you go, that's another superb and quite rare Greeves Griiffon Scrambler, this time of course configured for enduro racing, and it's also road registered as well. And I can imagine you could have quite a lot of fun riding some of the green lanes and the back roads on this superb British classic. Now, among all of those immaculately prepared shiny show bikes that were on display at Telford, I came across this decidedly unimmaculate version of a Greeves racer, and I think the owner on this particular example here just wanted to show everybody what one of these Greeves racers look like in their natural environment, and this one here looks like it's just come straight off the racetrack and then put on display. And whether the organisers of the Telford show issued the owner with a cleaning bill, I don't know, but it's quite surprising just how much interest this bike was actually generating over the Telford weekend. And I think it was because that this bike was completely different from every other machine that were in the halls over the weekend. So it was a far cry from the many concourse two-wheelers that most of the punters came to see. Anyhow, this featured mucky pup is Chris Dakin's 1967 MX4 Challenger 360, and again this bike here does have the Italian Seriani forks, as opposed to what would have been the old banana-style leading link jobs that we saw on our earlier Hoxton and Challenger. But again, these twin header pipes on that twin port barrel run underneath the engine this time, rather than over the top like they did on the Griiffon bike that we just had a look at. And the tank again is coloured in what looks like British racing green, which was a very popular colour for all manner of racing motorcycles in the 1960s. But then again, it's quite hard to see anything on this bike with the amount of mud and detritus that's all stuck to it. But then again, this is without doubt no show bike, and it's obviously well used, and I think it's quite important to keep these old classics racing on the track than really worrying about how they look and if it's got the proper period correct bits and pieces bolted onto it when it's being used. And Chris's example here is most definitely well used, as you can see, because some of this mud still looks quite wet, so I'm guessing that Chris has been racing this bike in the last 24 hours or so, because if it was longer than that, then this mud would have all dried out by now. And of course, these old Greeves racers will of course be well used to these kind of racing conditions, because as I refer back to my previous comment when I mentioned about those BBC winter scrambles, when more often than not these old Greeves machines would be up to their footrests and even deeper in thick mud when they try to circumnavigate some of those almost impassable winter scrambles racetracks. So there you go, that's Chris Dakin's 1967 360 Greeves Challenger. Now, in sharp comparison to Chris's mud-covered classic, this other Chris Dakin example is his 1967 MX4 360, which is basically a cleaned-up version of his British racing green bike that we've just taken a look at. And this one here will give you a bit of an idea of what that muddy green bike would actually look like after a nice wash and brush up. Anyhow, it's probably fair to assume that Chris is a bit of a fan of these old Greeves classics, because not only does he race them, he's got some exceptional show bikes as well. And this one here again is a superb example, even although it might have different rear shocks from the 1960s originals. And actually, I think these shocks look like they could be a nice pair of rock shocks, which are again a very popular choice for riders who race these older classic scramblers. And once more, you can see that on this 1967 model, we are back to using that alloy I-beam front down tube as the chassis main spar, and the usual lightweight, smaller diameter tubing there that makes up the remainder of this bike's chassis. And again, you can see here on the back of the chassis that the swing arm is still being made from simple box section type steel. And with regards to the engine, again, this once more was a simple piston port 360, or to give it its official title, it was actually a 364. And again, it had this massive barrel and head cooling fin layout, which I remember the bike testers of the time saying that this surface area of the barrel and head should be measured in feet rather than inches, because it was just so enormous. But this time it was an Amal 32mm concentric carburetor that was used to feed the premix into that engine, and to supply all the sparks, it was another Steffa magneto system that was employed, which again was quite reliable for that time period. And moving on to the transmission side, it was the tried and tested Albion 4-speeder gearbox again that was used on these Challengers, a unit that was, as I said, actually separate from the engine itself, and it just simply bolted onto the rear of the motor's crankcases. So if you needed to do some gearbox repairs, you didn't have to completely dismantle the entire engine. And with regards to the Challenger's clutch, I think I'm right in saying here that these engines did have an all-metal plate clutch that was oil-cooled in the conventional fashion, and they were very unlike other classic dirt bike clutches that usually had a combination of cork and steel plates, but that configuration of all steel plates still appeared to work very well on this engine. And additionally, here at the front of our 364 Greeves, we've got the banana style leading link forks again, with those two suspension units fitted onto the front as opposed to putting them up inside the fork tubes as you saw on the earlier Hoxton model. But again, in 1967 you did have the option to go for conventional Italian Serianis if you wanted to, or Seriani telehydraulic forks, as I remember they were often called, but a bit more expensive, of course, those forks, than these leading link setups. And I think we've already mentioned that Chris has fitted this pair of modern style rock shocks on the back of his Greeves, which will replace those old basic gurling dampers that would have been fitted here in 1967. But anyhow, this collection here of British-made Greeves were just a small sample of the many bikes that were on display at Telford in 2025, and these ones that we've had a look at here on the Greeves Riders Association display are just some of the finest British Greeves bikes you'll see in the country, because it appears that each year I come back to the show, the quality of machines that you come across just keeps getting better and better. But as I said, we will be dipping in and out of the Telford show throughout the closed winter racing season, and we'll be picking out a few nice examples that we've filmed from the show in the last 10 years or so. However, I do hope you've enjoyed this first venture from the Telford archives with these superb British Greeves bikes, and believe me when I say the best is yet to come. Right, so coming up next year on my CDB TV channel, we're going to take a look at this very original 1981 Honda CR250B, which of course wasn't one of Honda's finest moments, and this very original bike was filmed at Drumlandrig Castle a few years back, and this particular machine here came direct from a bike dealership in Japan. So we'll be taking a look at this machine in my next video posting here on my channel.